Welcome. We're glad you're here. American Heritage Education Foundation is based in Houston, Texas, and we're a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to the understanding and teaching of America's founding. This includes our founding history, philosophy, and principles. And our website is americanheritage.org if you would like more information about what we do. We're very excited to sponsor this academic competition and scholarship, and it's been a great opportunity to partner with the King's College of New York to host this event on their campus. We're very thankful for that. AHEF started the Challenge Bowl to address a growing problem in our nation, which is that many Americans today are not informed about America's heritage. And this includes Western civilization, as well as America's founding history, philosophy, laws, governing process, and free market system. So we know that there's been numerous studies in the past 20 years that have confirmed this problem. This is something that many of us are aware of now. We believe that citizens need to understand the American idea, and we have a particular interest in the principles of the Bible and how they shaped America's founding. We believe that students should be educated in these subjects so that they can become participants in our democracy and help defend our rights and freedoms. So we believe that's very important. And it's our hope that the Challenge Bowl would encourage colleges and universities to teach and students to learn America's heritage. We also hope to provide students an opportunity to further their studies, to gain a unique educational experience, and also just to have a positive influence in their lives and their future careers. These students that we have here today are examples of young adults who are productive and patriotic contributors in our society. We hope they will continue in their careers to be leaders. We just want to encourage them. In recognition of their studies, they will all receive scholarship prizes based on their order of finish in the competition, and they will also the winners will receive one of our books, The Miracle of America. So thank you again for being here. We hope you enjoy it, and may the best team win.
In the meantime, I thought it might be kind of fun to give you a little background on the foundation, American Heritage Education Foundation. It really is an outgrowth of a number of people that are not here. The first one is Dr. Richard Gonzalez, professor of economics at the University of Texas, my stepfather, my mother, Jeannie Gonzalez. Richard was an interesting academic. He came from a family that was from Spain. And the Gonzales family in Spain was given a land grant in northern Mexico back in the early 1800s. And the Gonzales family moved to there and had a number of offspring, of course, one of which fought in the Alamo for Texas independence in 1836. The interesting thing about the Gonzales family was that one of their youngest sons was named Rafael. Rafael was Richard's father, and he was the youngest of the Gonzales family and was told by the family, Rafael, the oldest son's going to inherit everything. You need to go to Laredo and figure out what you're going to do with your life. So Rafael goes to Laredo in about 1885 and decided that he would become a barber and learn the barber trade. He did that and then eventually matriculated to San Antonio, Texas in the late 1800s. Started a barber shop at the Manger Hotel. The hotel's still there, actually. And Rafael started the barber shop in the late 1800s and continued on. Had 6 children And the reason he wanted to become a barber was that he would have time to take his children to the library, to cultural events and things like that to become educated. They all 6 children had advanced degrees from the University of Texas in Austin. Richard, the youngest son, was born in 1912, graduated high school in San Antonio at the age of 15, went to the University of Texas. We don't say in Austin, really, we just the University of Texas, and got his BA at the age of 17, his master's at the age of 19, and his PhD at the age of 21. He's the youngest PhD that's ever come out of Austin, and we check on that every few years to make sure that's still the case. And the dean said, "Don't worry about it, Jack." He said, no one's going to be coming through at that age. But he was written up in the Austin American Statesman for being the youngest PhD to ever come out of UT. That was in 1934. He then pursued a career in academia, was a professor of economics, which was his specialty at the university. And then there was the oil business had started to grow in Texas a little bit. And there was a little independent oil company in Houston called Humble Oil, Humble. And the reason it was called Humble was because it was at a town called Humble, Texas, just northeast of Houston, about 20 miles. And Humble Oil Company was, small, independent, and starting to grow a little bit. And the founders in Houston were UT people, and they decided for some reason that they needed an economist to come on board and help them figure out where this oil business was headed and how to deal with the changes. It was during the Depression, of course, how the changes in the economy might affect the oil business. So they went up to Austin and asked the economics department, we're looking for somebody, and who would you recommend? And the economics professor said, well, Richard's our best young man, Richard Gonzales. Why don't you talk to him? Long story short, they hired Richard in 1937 to come to Houston. Richard thought he was just going to do this to get a little experience in the commercial world, in the business world. He didn't think it would be a career move. But he came to Houston and started working for Humble Oil, stayed in Houston, and about the late 1940s, early 1950s, he and Lorraine, his wife, they didn't have children. He decided he wanted to build a house and hired my father, who was an architect, to design a house for him on a little street called Tealway in Houston. And so my dad did that. The Gonzaleses and the Camraths became sort of friends because we lived on the same street as the Gonzaleses. And my dad was a Frank Lloyd Wright aficionado and loved that kind of architecture, and so did Richard. And they designed a house, Dad designed a house for the Gonzaleses in the middle 1950s. Richard went on to continue at Humble. Humble then it eventually was bought out by Standard Oil of New Jersey, biggest oil company in the country at that time. And the interesting thing about Humble Oil, Humble had grown so much and had found so many new oil fields that they became the largest subsidiary that Standard Oil purchased back in the 50s, early 60s. And Standard Oil then decided they needed to change their name a little bit, Standard being a little bit routine. They changed the name of the company to Exxon. And Standard Oil became Exxon, and Humble Oil was the largest subsidiary of that changeover. But then, of course, being bought out by a large conglomerate, Richard wasn't too happy about all of that, so he decided he would go ahead and retire, and did retire in 1965 and continued on doing consulting work in the energy field. He had become the nation's leading energy economist back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, came to Washington a lot, worked with Congress a lot on how to determine oil depletion allowances and all those sorts of things that you had to do in the oil business. But he was doing consulting work and was in London in 1970 with his wife Lorraine, and unfortunately Lorraine fell off a bus and was killed. Hit her head on the sidewalk, and Richard was then by himself at that time in 1970. Unrelated to that, my mother and dad became divorced and living on the same street. My mother was in the house, and of course they were friends of ours. Gonzales and Camras were friends, and Richard and mother started going places and doing things together, and ultimately got married in 1976. And became alarmed. They were both, mother was on the school board in Houston Independent School Board, and was involved in all of that. And Richard became alarmed in the late 70s that the Texas textbooks were not teaching factual, objective American history. This goes back to the late 70s, early 80s. So as a result of that, they decided to start a little foundation in Austin, Texas called Friends of American Heritage Education. The purpose of the foundation was to design and write primary and secondary programs, supplemental lesson plans for schools to use, for teachers to use directly in the classroom. They didn't have to go through the school boards, didn't have to go through administrative. It was all supplemental. It was approved by the National Council of Social Studies. And so they, Richard, being a UT fellow, he said, look, he went to the university leaders and said, look, I'd like to put some money into this program. Will you partner with us? Will the University of Texas partner with the Friends of American Heritage Education to do this program? And the university said, sure. So they did that, provided the money to this chair of free enterprise in Austin, and university, and the program got started. They were doing very well, had quite a few committees, were producing materials, and after a year, after having donated the money to the university axed the program and totally eliminated it and kept the money. And Richard, being a UT guy, didn't have any donor intent concerns when back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. He was not concerned about that, so he didn't really have his donor intent document protecting that funds for that specific purpose. So they lost the money, and the program was disbanded completely in about 1988, 1989. And as a result of that, obviously, Mother and Richard were pretty upset about that. Decided they would move back to Houston, sell their new house they had just built in Austin. They had planned to retire in Austin and move back to Houston. And we're in my office one day. I'm in the construction and design business. I'm not in the history business, really. And we're in my office one day, and we're telling me this story, and said, look, we'd like to keep this effort going forward, and I'll put some more money into it. And I said to them, well, that sounds interesting, sounds good, but you guys, you're in your 80s. Who's going to help you? And they kind of looked at me and said, you're nominated. So that's how I got involved in 1993. And the reason, and I also said, this is great, but I don't know anything about this subject. I need help. And they said, don't worry about that. We have just the man for you. And that man is Dr. Mike Owens, who's back over here. Dr. Mike Owens, a Texas education expert, and really quite an expert. And he had helped Richard and Mother back in Austin get started with their program originally in Austin. So they had been working with Mike all the time, all during this time, and said, Mike will help you, we'll talk to him, and hopefully he'll help you. And then that's what we did. And we started this foundation, American Heritage Education Foundation, in 1993, 1994, with the help of Dr. Owens. We put teams of social studies teachers together to write curricula, to write lesson plans, on on American history, founding principles, the Declaration, holidays, all the things that are pretty common to American history as we all know it. Since then, we have become one of the largest distributors of free K through 12 lesson plans in the country. We've reached about 150,000 teachers in all 50 states. We survey them every few years, and they teach an average of 17 students each. So we've impacted about 2.5 million, between 2.5, 3 million students across the country. There's in public schools, private schools, home schools, all types of schools. And so with that little background, the other thing that we've done, I wanted to mention, Angela's very modest. We've gone into the college area with this, not only this program, but with the book that Angela has written, The Miracle of America, The Influence of the Bible on the Founding History and Principles of the United States of America for a People of Every Belief. This is the only textbook that's ever been written that covers this subject in detail. Robbie George, Alan Kors at Pennsylvania, Robbie, of course, at Princeton, Alan Gelzo at Gettysburg College, all these leading educators, Steve Balch, Robert Koons, have all been amazed at this textbook. Angela is a biblical scholar par excellence. She has now become American history scholar, and we're very proud now. So we're kind of graduated into the college level a little bit in addition to K-12. But I wanted to invite Mike Owens to come up and say a few words about Richard and Mother, because my mother passed away this year at the age of 105. She was right up to the last when we had our first competition 2 years ago. She was at the event just like this, going strong, and it was a real loss to us to lose her this year. But Mike, say a few words about Richard and Mother, if you would.
Thanks. A few words, that's the key to this. Jeannie is what we call a sociometric star, somebody you can't say no to. She has a kind eyes, a wonderful personality, a very warm person, and very focused. And she came to me. I had gone to some of these free enterprise workshops as a teacher at the University of Texas at Austin, and they caught back up with me at a regional education service center in Texas. Y'all have BOCES, I think they call them here in New York. But we did teacher training, and they came to the office one day and said, "We want to do teacher training." I said, "That's the business I'm in. We can help." And Jeannie tells the story, says, the only person I ever talked to who says, "We can help you," and it was a bureaucrat. And so we went in and took their curriculum products for elementary school and developed them. Houston ISD was very supportive. Jeannie had been on the school board, and I knew all those people. And so we put out elementary curriculum. Then everybody said, "What about middle school? What about high school?" And in Texas, we have a state assessment. And so we did correlations of our materials with the state assessments, that all that stuff works together. But Jeannie was a guiding light in terms of what to do, and an adamant advocate of original source documents. She says, you education people add too much stuff to it. Go back to the original source. And as you look at the book and you look at the curriculum materials, you'll see, oh, wait, they believe in the Declaration and the Constitution. What does it say? And those are our core values, if you will. Do hope you'll go to the website. You'll find out about FERPA, Freedom, Unity, Progress, and Responsibility. So we've sort of taken our concepts and ideas over the years and helped put that together. Freedom is not only freedom of choice, free enterprise. You have lots of freedoms, but how do you keep them? That's critical. Unity, yeah, we elect one president, like him or not, we're all behind him. Doesn't really matter. That unity focus is one of the key elements that makes America great in a whole lot of different kinds of things. Progress, part of that's economic, but part of that's social. We aren't what we want to be, but we know what we want to be. And so everybody does something. That's what makes me I feel so great seeing you here. I see real political potential here. We got people that can move progressives forward in the future, and that's important. And the last one is responsibility, and we all have a responsibility to contribute to the values of the nation, to the actions of the nation, both in terms of economic enterprise, in terms of social values. And so those are some of the core values that the foundations work for. And like I said, I've been with it a long time because I believe it's right. And really do appreciate you being here and spending the time. I'm so happy I did not have to spend the night taking those questions and make them work. Very difficult, very difficult. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. That little rubric of freedom, unity, progress, and responsibility actually came from the mind of Richard Gonzalez. He wrote back as early as 1951. We've got those articles about why American corporations and American schools were not doing a very good job of transmitting America's key characteristics, not only in the schools, but throughout the country, throughout the world. And so he came up with this formula of America of 4 key characteristics: freedom. We got our freedom, earned our freedom through the Revolutionary War and all of that period of time. Well, freedom to do what? We had 13 very different, unusual colonies, all had different types of economies and types of people. But they came together, they united as the United States of America. Very unusual at that time. Many of the states did not want to become the United States of America. They wanted to stay independent, but they did unify. Well, what happened when we earned freedom and we unified? What was the result of that? And the result of that was incredible progress over the next 200 years. And that progress allows us to be literally where we are today: air-conditioned rooms, technology. So progress is a key, and I'll talk a little bit more about progress in a minute. But then after we have progress and we're become a wealthy nation, what do we do as Americans? We give back. That's why we're here today. We could not be here today if people didn't support us and give back who had the ability to support us. And Richard used to talk about Mexico because his ancestors came from Mexico. He said, you know, Jack, he said, the difference in Mexico and is in countries like Mexico, many in Europe, where the people are generally taught either directly or indirectly that your place in society is the will of God. So don't worry about it. You may want to just accept your place in society as the will of God. But in America, it was different. He said, with the help of God, you could do anything. And that was the big difference that he saw in countries like America and countries that were not like America. But he also would break down progress. He said, Jack, you need to understand the 4 key characteristics of progress. And I said, tell me all about it. He said, freedom, start with freedom, but then you have education. Education is the way up. That's the way my family came out of their situation. That's the way I've been able to grow in my situation. So education is critical to everything. And new ideas, new inventions, new machines, new ways of production. But what happens when you have freedom and new ideas? New ideas is not going to go very far if it doesn't have capital. So the 3rd key characteristic of progress is capital investment. That funds projects and ideas that are in the works and in people's minds but have not come to fruition yet. And then once capital is applied to new ideas and new things are begun, what do you need? What would be the 4th characteristic of progress? Energy. You need cheap forms of energy to fuel all these new inventions, i.e. the automobile, airplanes, railroads, and on down the line. So he said, Jack, if you stick to those 4 key characteristics of America and the 4 key characteristics of progress, you'll be on the right track. So that's what we've tried to do with this with this function, with this competition. There's two people that have been critical to this competition, about which we would not be here today. I met Steve Balch about 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago. I'm not even sure how we met, Steve, but anyway, I was admiring some of the work that the National Association of Scholars had produced. Steve was the founder of the National Association of Scholars, based here in New York City. And I asked him to introduce me, if he would, to some educators in the East so that I could come to the East with a videographer and interview some of these well-known teachers like Robbie George and Alan Kors and Alan Gelzo and people like that. And he was so kind, and he said, I'll be glad to help you. He introduced me to all these people. We brought a photographer up, interviewed them all, put it on tape, and we have that available. But after that, we were thinking about, well, you know, how do we get colleges motivated to get involved in these things, these subjects, because they seem to be disappearing around the country. And he said, well, let's think about a competition. And the competition sounded good. I'm an old ex-tennis player, and so I'm all about competition, and kids love competition. And the interesting thing about it, I have a son who is a professional baseball player, doesn't play anymore because he was hurt, but the average salary for a baseball player in the major leagues today is about $3 million, average. And it's about the same for football players. So we thought, well, let's have a competition, but let's incentivize the students with some financial reward. And so that's how we came up with this idea to provide cash scholarships to the students, and we did that the first go-around 2 years ago. Turned out to be very, very well received, and we've now doubled that this year, and we hope to keep improving that so that we can even get up to really unlimited amounts of cash scholarships for students that are proficient in these subjects of American history, Western Civ. But Steve, would you come up and say a few words about the importance of this competition and others like it?
Well, thank you so much, Jack, for those kind words, and thank you, everybody who has come here today to join in the excitement. I grew up at a time when knowledge of history and philosophy and literature was expected of every college graduate, in which most institutions took transmitting that knowledge, particularly as it pertained to American history and what people unashamedly talked about then as Western history. Most colleges took that responsibility very seriously. I grew up here in New York City, which was no different from the rest of the country in my day in that respect. I went to Brooklyn College, which is over the river, and I can recall my first year there, enrolling in the first of a two-course sequence on Western civilization and receiving a big, thick book that had been produced by the faculty. It wasn't a real book. It was a lot of what they then called mimeographed sheets of paper, but it was probably, it was a real, you could have used it as a doorstop. It was a real thick bundle of information, and it had been put together by the history department at Brooklyn College itself. It was their own text and their own set of primary sources. And I had a remarkable experience in that class, and not only did I learn a great deal, but I also came to understand that Western civilization was worth learning about, that it was very, very important. 3 years into my experience at Brooklyn College, there was a program at that time called the General Electric College Bowl, and it consisted of what exactly we have kind of recreated here, competitions between teams drawn from colleges around the country. about specific knowledge of facts in all the humanistic and social science and science fields as well. So Brooklyn College was chosen to field a team. I thought that I had the medal. I wasn't nearly as good as the people who have been competing here today, but I thought I had the right stuff for the times at least. And I showed up with about 199 other people. It was a 200-packed crowd auditorium trying out for this team. And of course, it was, it was kind of short answer test that everyone was given. And there were 4 places. They had 4 people teams. There were 4 places to be filled, and I did very, very, very well, but stiff competition, I ended up 5th. And that meant that I was the alternate on the team. So, and something happened, and I thought a lot about how I could make something happen. Had something happened to one of the 4, I would have gotten my my moment of fame. We did pretty well. We won 2. You could win up to 4 matches in a row, at which point you were sort of retired as an undefeated champion, and there was a special kind of gift for the students on a team like that. We won our first 2 matches, and then we lost. We were a team. It was Brooklyn College, and back then, and we were all Jewish kids. And for whatever reason, all the teams we played were from Catholic institutions. University of Detroit, we beat them. Georgetown University, we beat them. And then Marymount Manhattan. And I think that there was some kind of discrimination going on, no doubt, because all the questions following that 3rd match were quotes from Latin, and we lost. But we had a coach who was an Irishman, and he had promised us that if we beat Marymount Manhattan, our final opponents were going to be no less than the College of Cardinals. But alas, that never happened. So we're continuing in that great tradition. I'm delighted to be part of it, and I'm excited as I can possibly be to see what the outcome is going to be of the final match later today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Should have said that after leaving the National Association of Scholars in good hands with Peter Wood, Steve moved to, I think I told you earlier in the other day that Steve moved to Texas and has now started the program in Western Civ at Texas Tech University in Lubbock. So we're glad to have him now as a naturalized Texan. The other key individual who we could not have done this competition without is Dr. Robert Koons. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of Texas, very active in that, of course. At the same time, very interested in Western Civ, to the point, actually, that he started a program at the university in Western Civ and the Great Books back about 10 years ago. And interestingly enough, not unlike the experience of Dr. Gonzales and my mother, the university jerked that program away from him after he started and raised a lot of money. They still have it going, but in a sort of a different format. But Rob Koons is a giant in this field, and we're so pleased that he has continued to help us in the foundation with this event, done a tremendous amount of research. And Rob, could you please come up and say a few words?
Thank you, Jack, for that very generous introduction. I'm very pleased and happy to be part of this. I did want to. One nice thing about being last is I can brag on Steve Balch a little bit here. So I think you may not be aware of what a giant you have here with us. When I first started in graduate school, I already realized that there were problems in higher education. That higher education it was suffering a kind of amnesia, really, of forgetting who we are, what we're all about, what's the purpose of what we're doing. And I found out about this group called the National Association of Scholars that Steve was just organizing, and went to one of the very first, I think, conferences, if not the very first one. And it was, you know, tell me what to do. I'm in on this. And so he's been an inspiration and a leader for me really throughout my whole career. And I shudder to think of what would have happened in higher education if there had been no Steve Balch and no National Association of Scholars. We would really be in a deep, deep hole, even deeper than we are today. And I also really appreciate Jack. He was one of those people who generously gave money to the program I tried to create at UT that got reappropriated by the administration at the time. And you know, that, again, just reinforced, well, you know, I've written a lot of fairly extreme Jeremiads about how bad higher education is. I don't, you can Google it and see them if you like, things about dark satanic mills and whatnot. but I like to be on the positive side as well, not just emphasizing how bad things are, but trying to think about ways of making things better. And that's what I tried to do at UT. Didn't work, so I'm trying other things now. And I think I should mention the classical learning test that Jeremy's working on. I think that's a good example in the area of secondary education of helping to support and encourage the good things that are going on there through a test that enables students and teachers really to demonstrate their excellence. That's really what we're trying to do here as well. There are good things going on in the higher education realm as well, and you are great representations of that, actually, very top representations of that. And so we created this event as a way for you to demonstrate that excellence and for you to get some of the recognition across the country that you deserve. So we're starting small, but we're hoping that eventually this will become something that will be really well known, like a national spelling bee, that sort of thing, receiving constant national recognition, and that will just help, again, reinforce and support all the good work that you're doing out there. So great, thanks very much for coming.